Good. You ready?
I'm good to go.
Good. Sorry again.
No worries. I'm sorry. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is George Anthony Poulos, and today we're going to be having a look at some good and bad statistics. So let's start off with the good. CDC study finds about 78% of people hospitalized for COVID were overweight or obese. Now first, let's just have a quick look at the facts of this stat. The statistic type we're looking at here is a mean / proportion relative frequency. The variables measured are COVID-related hospitalization and weight category. The population is COVID-positive individuals, and the sample was of 71,491 patients hospitalized with COVID in 238 U.S. hospitals. The sampling procedure used here was stratified. So why does this sample work? There is no sampling bias whatsoever. The data was brought directly from numbers from these 238 hospitals. Well sourced, there's a large sample size, so that ensures statistical significance for the claims made. And there's no sort of statistical manipulation. The numbers are very raw, easily accessible, easy to digest, and more importantly, the source on this one. It is an unquestionably, irrefutably, unequivocally reliable source. I would actually go so far as to say that it might very well be the most reliable source on the planet, the CDC. So yeah, I think personally, only an idiot would question something put out by the CDC. So now we're going to have a look at a not so good statistic. CDC study finds vaccination against COVID-19 immunizes 5 times better than previous infection. So, what is this guy saying? Okay, don't worry about it, I'll get into that. So let's look at the stat facts. Statistic type is proportion. The variables measured here are vaccination status and COVID positivity. Put that little asterisk because, as I'll mention later, there actually were quite a few other variables, but for the purposes of this exercise, just look at those two. Population is Americans in general. It's meant to track how Americans fare with natural immunity versus vaccine immunity, and the sample size was 139,665 people hospitalized for COVID-like symptoms. But that was further stratified to 7,348 people in that sample who met the study criteria, and the sampling procedure once again is stratified. So what on earth could possibly be wrong with this statistic? Well, it's a pretty long list. I'm sorry to bore you guys, but it only examined COVID-like hospitalizations, and the thing about that is that, first of all and foremost, it doesn't account for asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic infections, which, you notice how we're all wearing masks right now? That's because of the supposed threat of asymptomatic spread, but this study does not account for that in any capacity whatsoever. It only looks at those who were hospitalized for their illness. And the vaccine group in this study was limited to people who received the vaccine within 180 days of their hospitalization, which is kind of convenient, seeing as the studies out now seem to suggest that the immunity provided by vaccines begins waning after 6 months. Didn't disclose the total number of subjects who had natural immunity versus vaccine immunity. They only gave their stratified 2 groups. And the samples essentially boil down to 1,020 who were previously infected, had natural immunity, and 6,328 who had COVID and were previously vaccinated. Of the 1,020 with natural immunity, 89 tested positive. Of the 6,328 who were vaccinated, 324 tested positive. So the absolute frequency of infections was higher in the vaccinated group, but the percentage of positive tests was used for these calculations. So essentially, infection was found in 5.1% of the vaccinated group versus 8.7% of the natural immunity group. And if you do some quick math, that gives you a 1.705 unadjusted odds ratio, which, given the incredibly small sample size for the natural immunity group, may very well fail to reach statistical significance. But okay, forget all that stuff. You have 1.7 times the likelihood in the vaccinated group versus the natural immunity group. But that's kind of weird, right? Because that headline didn't say vaccines are 1.7 times more effective than natural immunity. It said they were 5 times more effective. So how do you get from 1.7 to 5? Well, there's more. So the adjusted odds ratios and 95% confidence intervals were calculated using multivariable logistic regression adjusted for age, geographic region, calendar time, local virus circulation, blah, 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 socio-demographic and health characteristics. So this is essentially a series of variables that were weighted. Unbeknownst to us, the CDC did not disclose their calculation methods for their weighting in these adjusted odds ratios. They did say which variables they looked at, but they didn't say what weights they assigned to them or why. And after this impassioned performance of Pimp My Stats that the CDC employed, they finally came to the conclusion that COVID vaccines are offer 5 times the protection than those who have natural immunity. So what can we learn from this, guys? Well, don't blindly accept studies' conclusions based off headlines. If you actually review the numbers yourself, look at primary sources, review their methodologies, you might just find that their conclusions can be slightly misleading. Not that I'm suggesting that in the slightest. But more than anything, guys, trust the science. Just trust the science and trust the science. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's go back to the person who's going.
Sorry, let me go.
You went too fast for me.
Miss, I think that deserves 100.
Let me open that up.
Because it was engaging? That's your measure of
Miss,
success?
I think everybody was reading the board.
But there's too much stuff on the slides. But that is for when you do IP and other
No, I
courses
meant like
that.
everybody in the class was paying attention.
I know. Maybe what we should tell George is if he thinks of being a teacher, he's going to be very engaging. It's true.
I think I'd enjoy it.